In the shadowed vaults of eternity, where the wine of kings turns to venom in forgotten toasts, one half-born soul alone tasted the lie woven into the chalice. The wind howled through the cracked spires of Castle Dravenmore like a lament from the grave, carrying the scent of impending storm and ancient stone. Ilara Voss, the Dhampir of whispered legends, stood at the edge of the grand hall, her pale skin glowing faintly under the flicker of iron candelabras. She was 32 in human years, born in the fog-shrouded moors of 19th-century Romania to a mortal mother, a healer abandoned by her village for consorting with shadows, and a vampire father whose name was lost to the blood wars that had ravaged the immortal realms. Ilara's life had been a fracture. Orphaned at 15 when her mother's fever claimed her, and her father's kin hunted her as an abomination, neither fully alive nor eternally damned. She bore the scars of that rejection, a jagged line across her left palm from a silver blade that still burned on moonless nights, and the hunger that twisted her veins, a thirst she sated only with the blood of beasts, never men. Her desire was simple, fierce, to belong, to forge a legacy beyond the half-life that mocked her existence. Yet doubt gnawed at her, a philosophical specter, questioning if redemption lay in the light of day or the endless night. Across the hall, King Thorn Blackwood presided over the council like a statue carved from obsidian and regret. Immortal for over 5 centuries, he had risen from the ashes of the vampire purge of 1472, a war where mortal inquisitors and rival clans had bathed Europe in crimson rivers. Thorn was no monster of folklore. His ethics were forged in solitude, a code that forbade the turning of innocence and demanded justice among his kind. But guilt shadowed him like a second skin, the memory of his mortal lover, Eliza, slain by his own hand in a frenzy of bloodlust during the siege of Constantinople. He had chosen eternity then, refusing death's embrace to lead his fractured kingdom, but the weight of that choice had hollowed him. At what felt like an eternal 40 in appearance, with raven hair streaked silver at the temples and eyes like polished hematite, Thorn sought not power, but atonement. His trauma lingered in the faded tattoo on his wrist, a thorny rose encircled by a crown, symbolizing the love he had poisoned with his curse. The council chamber thrummed with tension, the air thick with the musk of velvet robes and polished oak. Rain lashed the arched windows, distorting the moon's pale gaze into fractured silver shards. Thorn raised his goblet, the deep red liquid within catching the candlelight like captured rubies. "To alliances unbroken," he intoned, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the tapestried walls depicting battles long faded, clans clashing in misty fields, betrayal etched in every stroke. The elders nodded, their faces gaunt masks of immortality. Lord Vesper, the silver-tongued diplomat with a history of brokered peaces that masked his ambitions. Lady Isolde, whose eyes held the sorrow of a century lost to plague. And the others, relics of wars that had toppled thrones and birthed new shadows. Ilara lingered in the periphery, invited as Thorn's reluctant advisor. A Dhampir's unique senses made her invaluable in these precarious times. The kingdom teetered on the brink of another conflict, whispers of mortal hunters allying with dissident vampires, reaching even the castle's depths. She watched Thorn's lips touch the goblet, her heightened awareness prickling like thorns under skin. The wine. It carried an undercurrent, a bitter alchemy not of grapes, but of nightshade and wolfsbane, distilled to mimic the bouquet of aged blood. Her half-vampire blood rebelled, a visceral warning coiling in her gut. Poison, not from an assassin's blade, but from within, from the very hands that now raised their own cups in feigned solidarity. She stepped forward, her boots whispering against the threadbare rugs, heart pounding a rhythm that drowned the distant thunder. The hall fell silent, all eyes turning to her uninvited presence. Thorn's gaze met hers, a flicker of curiosity piercing his stoic facade. In that moment, Ilara felt the pull, the inevitable tether between mortal fragility and immortal isolation. She had resisted it since arriving at Dravenmoor 3 moons past, rationalizing her growing affinity for the king as mere duty. He was a symbol of the eternity she could never fully claim, his loneliness mirroring her own fractured soul. Yet here, in the velvet gloom, resistance cracked like old plaster. "My lord," she said, her voice steady despite the storm within, "that wine, it harbors death." Gasps rippled through the council. Vesper's smile faltered, a shadow crossing his features. Thorn lowered the goblet, inhaling deeply, but his senses, dulled by centuries of guarded trust, detected nothing amiss. Alara's hand trembled as she extended her palm, the scarred flesh aching. "Taste it through me," she urged, a ritual of vulnerability she had never offered another. It was a choice: reveal the betrayal and invite the council's wrath, or let the venom claim the king she had silently sworn to protect. Thorn hesitated, the weight of his past guilt surfacing, another life he might fail to save. Then, with deliberate grace, he pressed the goblet to her lips, just enough for a drop to touch her tongue. Agony bloomed, sharp and metallic, confirming the treachery. She spat it out, vision blurring as the poison warred with her hybrid resilience. "The council," she whispered, eyes locking on Vesper's now pale face. "One among you seeks the throne through murder." Chaos erupted, accusations flying like daggers, chairs scraping against stone. Thorn rose, his presence commanding silence, but Alara saw the fracture in his eyes, the realization that his solitude had blinded him to the serpents at his table. As guards seized Vesper, who snarled denials laced with venomous truth, Alara slumped against a pillar, the taste of betrayal lingering like ash. In the ensuing frenzy, Thorn knelt beside her, his cool hand brushing her fevered brow, a touch that ignited something forbidden, a spark of redemption amid the curse. "Why risk yourself for me?" he murmured, voice laced with wonder and dread. "Because in your shadows, I see my own light," she thought, but the words caught in her throat. The night deepened, rain weeping down the panes, and as Vesper's screams echoed into confession, Alara wondered if this act had bound her to eternity's throne or doomed her to its fall. The storm outside Castle Dravenmoor raged like the fury of forgotten gods, thunder cracking the sky as if to shatter the illusions of trust within. Rain hammered the leaded windows, turning the world beyond into a blurred tapestry of gray and black, while inside the grand hall, the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of spilled wine and the acrid bite of fear. Alara Voss leaned against the cold pillar, her body a battlefield where the poison's remnants clashed with her Dhampir resilience. Her scarred palm throbbed, a reminder of old wounds reopened, as if the silver blade from her youth had found new purpose in this moment of revelation. She watched King Thorn Blackwood rise from his kneel, his silhouette framed by the dying flicker of candelabras, their flames dancing shadows across his chiseled features, features etched with the weight of centuries, yet softened now by an unspoken gratitude. Vesper's confessions tore through the chamber like a gale, his voice breaking under the guard's unyielding grip. "It was for the realm's salvation," he spat, his silver tongue finally uncoiling into raw desperation. The diplomat's eyes, once smooth as polished marble, now gleamed with the madness of a cornered beast. He had laced the goblet not out of petty ambition, he claimed, but to end Thorn's weary reign, to usher in a new era where vampires bowed to no fragile mortal alliances. The council elders shifted uneasily, their velvet robes whispering accusations in the tense silence. Lady Isolde's face paled to the hue of frost-kissed marble, her fingers twisting a locket that held the faded portrait of a child lost to the plagues of old. Betrayal festered here, not as a single venomous act, but as a web spun from the kingdom's endless wars. The vampire purge's echoes still reverberated, Mortal hunters massing at the borders, and dissident clans whispering of uprisings in the shadowed vales. Thorn's hand lingered a fraction too long on Alara's shoulder before he turned to face the turmoil, his touch a cool ember that seared through her woolen cloak, igniting questions she dared not voice. Why had she intervened? Duty, she told herself, rationalizing the pull that drew her to him like moonlight to a moth. He was the king, the anchor of a realm teetering on oblivion, and she, the half-blood outsider, owed him nothing beyond the fragile pact that kept her from the hunter's pyres. Yet in the depths of her fractured soul, she knew it was more, a mirror to her own isolation, his guilt an echo of her abandonment. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, and in Thorn she glimpsed the man who had made that choice in blood-soaked Constantinople, only to lose Eliza in the process. His tattoo, the thorny rose on his wrist, peeked from beneath his cuff like a secret wound, symbolizing the love that had twisted into curse. "Take him to the depths," Thorn commanded, his voice a velvet thunder that quelled the rising chaos. The guards dragged Vesper away, his protests dissolving into the corridor's gloom, leaving the hall to breathe in uneasy quiet. The remaining elders bowed their heads, murmuring oaths of renewed loyalty. But Alara sensed the fractures, the subtle glances exchanged, the way Isolde's breath hitched as if weighing her own shadows. Political war simmered beneath the surface, a serpent coiled in the heart of the immortal court. Thorn dismissed them with a wave, the council dispersing like smoke through the arched doorways, their footsteps fading into the creak of ancient wood and the relentless patter of rain. Alone now, save for the flickering sentinels of candlelight, Thorn approached Alara once more. The air between them thickened, scented with beeswax and the faint, lingering bitterness of the poisoned wine. He extended a hand, not in command, but in offering, a ritual of sorts, born from the vulnerability she had shown. "Come," he said softly, his hematite eyes searching hers. "The poison may have spared you, but its shadow lingers. Let me ensure it." She hesitated, her heart a distant drumbeat against the storm's roar. To accept was to step closer to the abyss of his world, where love and eternity intertwined like thorns and bloom. Alara had always resisted such entanglements, her traumas whispered of loss, the mother's fevered deathbed, the father's kin who branded her monster. Belonging was the illusion she philosophized in the quiet hours, a mortal fancy unfit for one who straddled life and undeath. Yet inevitability tugged at her, undeniable as the tide. She placed her hand in his, the contact sending a shiver through her veins, her warmth meeting his eternal chill. Together, they ascended the spiral staircase to his private chambers, the castle's stones groaning under the wind's assault, as if the very walls mourned the night's treachery. The room was a sanctuary of faded opulence, heavy drapes of black velvet framing tall windows where lightning etched silver veins across the sky, a massive four-poster bed shrouded in crimson silk, and a hearth where embers glowed like dying stars. Thorn guided her to a chaise by the fire, his movements precise, almost tender. From a hidden alcove, he retrieved a vial of crystalline liquid, elixir distilled from moonlit herbs, a remedy forged in the alchemical fires of his long exile. "Drink," he urged, pressing it to her lips. As she swallowed, the cool essence bloomed in her throat, chasing away the venom's ache, but awakening something deeper, a shared silence, intimate and probing. "Why me?" Thorn asked, settling beside her, his presence a gravitational pull. The firelight played across his face, highlighting the silver streaks in his hair, the subtle lines of regret that no immortality could erase. "You could have let the cup claim its due. The Dhampir owes no fealty to a vampire throne." Alara met his gaze, the flames reflecting in her eyes like captured souls. The question mirrored her own dilemmas, the choice between her half-life solitude and the redemption that flickered in his shadowed ethics. "Because death walks too closely here," she replied, her voice a whisper laced with the rain's rhythm. "And in your court, I've tasted something beyond survival, a light in the endless night." It was truth half-spoken, her resistance cracking further as she traced the thorny rose on his wrist with her fingertip, the ink's texture rough under her skin. The touch was electric, a moment of revelation. Not just alliance, but the stirrings of a bond that could redeem or damn. Outside, the storm peaked, wind howling through the spires like the wail of Eliza's ghost, reminding them both of loves poisoned by fate. Thorn's hand covered hers, a vow unspoken, but as the embers popped in the hearth, a distant horn sounded from the battlements, scouts signaling riders at the gates, bearing tidings of mortal incursions laced with vampire traitors. The war that Vesper's plot had only previewed now pressed at the threshold, demanding choices that could shatter thrones and hearts alike. Ilara pulled away slightly, the warmth fading, doubt coiling anew. Had she saved the king only to bind herself to his falling realm? In the fire's glow, Thorn's eyes held a plea. "Stay, choose this fragile eternity with me." But the horn's echo lingered, a harbinger of shadows yet to unfold. As lightning illuminated the room in stark white, she wondered if their tether would illuminate the darkness or drag them both into its depths. The thunder's echo had barely faded when the horn's wail pierced the chamber like a blade through silk, summoning shadows from the corners of Thorn's sanctuary. Ilara's hand slipped from his, the warmth of their fleeting connection cooling like dew under dawn's indifferent gaze. The fire in the hearth sputtered, casting elongated silhouettes that danced across the crimson-draped walls as if the castle itself recoiled from the intrusion. Outside, the storm's fury mingled with the distant clamor of hooves on cobblestone, riders, not spectral, but flesh and steel, their arrival a punctuation to Vesper's unraveling plot. Thorn's face hardened, the lines of regret deepening into resolve, his hematite eyes flicking to the window where lightning clawed the sky, illuminating the silhouettes of armored figures massing beyond the gates. "Stay here," he murmured, rising with the fluid grace of one who had danced with death for centuries. But Ilara was no fragile mortal to be sequestered. Her Dhampir blood surged, a hybrid fire that rejected cages. She followed him to the balcony, the chill wind whipping her cloak like accusatory fingers, carrying the scent of wet earth and iron. Blood, perhaps, already spilled in the outer yards. Below, torches bobbed like fireflies in the deluge, guards shouting orders as the riders dismounted, their cloaks sodden and emblazoned with the sigil of the eastern clans. A serpent coiled around a fractured crown. Allies or harbingers? The political web tightened, Vesper's betrayal merely the first thread pulled loose. Thorn descended the spiral stairs ahead of her, his boots echoing a measured cadence against the groaning wood, each step a philosophical meditation on trust's fragility. He had built this kingdom on oaths forged in the Purge's aftermath, allying with mortal lords to stave off Inquisitor's flames, only to watch those bonds fray under the weight of immortality's isolation. Eliza's ghost whispered in his mind, her laughter silenced by his fangs in Constantinople's ruins, a choice that had birthed his throne but hollowed his soul. Now, as he entered the great hall once more, the thorny rose on his wrist itched like a fresh scar, a symbol of love's venomous bloom. Ilara trailed him, her heart a tempest of resistance. She rationalized her pursuit as loyalty to the realm that sheltered her, not the man whose solitude mirrored her own fractured exile. Yet the pull was inevitable, a gravitational ache drawing her toward the light he concealed in shadows. The hall, still reeking of spilled wine and tension, now brimmed with urgency. Scouts burst through the doors, rain streaming from their capes, faces gaunt under flickering candelabras. "My lord," the lead one gasped, kneeling in a puddle that spread like ink across the flagstones. The riders bear tidings from the border clans, mortal hunters, allied with our dissidents, advance under cover of night, They claim Vesper's plot as divine retribution, demanding your abdication or your head. The words hung heavy, textured with the storm's rhythm. Rain lashing the panes like frantic heartbeats, distant shouts filtering through the stone. Thorn's council remnants gathered swiftly, Lady Isolde, her locket clutched like a talisman, and a handful of loyalists whose eyes darted with unspoken fears. Betrayal's aftertaste lingered. Vesper's confession had exposed not just one serpent, but a nest coiled in the kingdom's underbelly. Wars of old resurfaced, the purges' pyres, clan skirmishes in misty vales, all converging on Dravenmoor's spires. Ilara positioned herself at Thorn's side, her presence a quiet assertion, senses attuned to the rider's approach. She caught fragments of their murmurs through the gale, names whispered, alliances bartered like souls at a crossroads. One voice, sharp as shattered glass, mentioned the Dhampir's blood as a key to unlocking ancient pacts, sending a shiver through her veins. Her hybrid nature, once a curse, now a weapon in this theater of shadows. As the lead rider was ushered in, a weathered vampire named Garrick, his face scarred from border skirmishes, Thorn faced him with regal poise, the air between them thick as velvet fog. Garrick bowed low, but his eyes gleamed with calculation, water dripping from his cloak to pool at his feet. The clans unite against the mortal tide, King Thorn. But whispers say your rule invites the hunter's fire. Vesper's act was a spark. The inferno comes. Yield the throne to a council of equals, or we fracture the realm ourselves. The hall fell silent, save for the fire's crackle and the wind's mournful howl, every breath a suspended choice between unity and ruin. Ilara's instincts flared, her scarred palm burning as if the silver from her youth coursed anew. She stepped forward, unbidden, her voice cutting through the tension like moonlight on frost. Equals, or opportunists cloaked in necessity? Garrick's gaze snapped to her, recognition flickering. Rumors of the Dhampir advisor had spread like mist through the clans. In that instant, revelation dawned. These riders were no mere messengers. Their scents carried the faint trace of wolfsbane, the same poison's echo from the goblet. Traitors embedded, turning political war into personal vendetta. Thorn's hand brushed hers in warning, but she pressed on, a ritual unfolding in the charged air, a moment of raw choice. Test their loyalty, she urged him, extending her palm toward Garrick. Let me taste the truth in their veins, as I did the wine. It was vulnerability incarnate, offering her hybrid senses as a blade against deception. The hall inhaled sharply, Isolde's fingers tightened on her locket, eyes wide with the weight of potential schism. Thorn hesitated, his ethics warring with the solitude that had isolated him. Trust another, risk another loss like Eliza's. But in Ilara's defiant gaze, he saw redemption's fragile spark, the beauty in suffering's forge. With a nod, he commanded it. Garrick recoiled, but guards pinned him, and Ilara approached, her touch light on his wrist. The contact was intimate, electric, a prick of fang to draw the essence, not to feed, but to discern. Bitter undercurrents flooded her. Ambition, laced with the same alchemical venom, proof of deeper conspiracy. She released him, vision swimming, the hall blurring into reds and golds under the candelabra's glow. They carry the poison's kin, she declared, voice steady despite the ache. The council's shadow extends to the borders. Chaos ignited anew, Garrick's snarl twisting into confession under duress, revealing a network of dissidents plotting Thorn's fall to seize power amid the encroaching mortal war. Isolde gasped, her own loyalties fracturing visibly, a tear tracing her cheek like liquid moonlight. Thorn's face was a mask of controlled fury, but beneath, Ilara sensed the tremor. Another betrayal etching his guilt deeper, questioning if his throne was worth the endless cycle of loss. As guards hauled Garrick away, echoing Vesper's fate into the depths, Thorn turned to Ilara, the thorny rose tattoo stark against his skin in the firelight. "You bind yourself to this madness," he whispered, close enough for her to feel the cool whisper of his breath, stirring the inevitable tide of their connection. She met his eyes, resistance crumbling like ancient stone. In his shadows, she glimpsed not just eternity's curse, but a love that could redeem the damned. Yet the storm outside swelled, horns blaring from the battlements, more riders or the hunters themselves. The choice loomed: stand with him in this war of thrones and hearts, or flee the light she had awakened. In that suspended breath, as rain wept down the windows like tears for choices yet unmade, Ilara wondered if their tether would forge redemption or unravel into eternal night. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The rain's relentless assault on Castle Dravenmoor had softened to a mournful drizzle, veiling the world in a shroud of mist that clung to the battlements like the breath of the dying. Ilara Voss stood frozen in the great hall's threshold, the echo of blaring horns still vibrating through her bones, a discordant symphony that drowned the hearth's dying crackle. Her scarred palm pulsed with residual fire from the ritual tasting, the silver's phantom bite mingling with the deeper ache of revelations unearthed. Garrick's confession hung in the air like incense from a profane altar, tendrils of conspiracy weaving from Vesper's plot to the eastern clans, a political venom seeping into the kingdom's veins. Thorn Blackwood, king of shadows and regrets, paced the flagstones before her, his cloak trailing like spilled ink, the thorny rose tattoo on his wrist catching the sporadic flicker of lightning through the arched windows. The hall, once a bastion of velvet opulence, now felt like a tomb awaiting its occupant. Candelabras wept wax in uneven pools, their flames guttering against drafts that carried the scent of sodden earth and distant smoke, harbingers of the mortal hunter's advance. Ilara's hybrid senses sharpened, parsing the night's textures, the creak of settling stone, the faint metallic tang of blood from Garrick's restrained thrashing in the depths below, the subtle shift in Thorn's breath, ragged with the weight of isolation cracking under siege. She had chosen to stand with him, to taste the truth in traitor's blood, rationalizing it as survival's calculus. Her half-life demanded alliances in this war of thrones. Yet the inevitability gnawed at her, a philosophical serpent questioning if this tether to the immortal king was redemption's path, or the curse of entanglement in eternity's endless wars. Thorn halted, his hematite eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that pierced the gloom, illuminating the fractures in his stoic facade. "The horns call for counsel," he said, voice a low timbre resonant with centuries of command, tempered by guilt. Eliza's ghost flickered in his mind unbidden, her warm hand in his during Constantinople's final siege, poisoned by his emerging hunger, a choice that had birthed his immortality but slain the light he craved. Now, with dissidents and mortals converging, he faced the same crossroads: lead his fractured realm into oblivion or yield to the shadows that sought his fall. Isolde remains loyal, but the web spreads. We must confront the riders before they fracture what little unity survives. Ilara nodded, her woolen cloak heavy with damp, the fabric chafing against skin still fevered from the poison's echo. She followed him into the antechamber, where Lady Isolde awaited. Her form, a silhouette of sorrow against the tapestried walls depicting the vampire purge's crimson fields. The elder's locket dangled like a pendulum of memory, her eyes, pools of century-old grief, rimmed with unshed tears. "The clans demand audience, my lord," she whispered, her voice textured with the rustle of silk and regret. "They speak of abdication, but I sense the hunter's influence, mortal steel blessed with holy fire, allying with our own to topple you. Vesper's venom was but the prelude. This is the symphony of betrayal." The words coiled around Alara like mist, evoking her own traumas. The moor's fog where her mother's fevered body had cooled without her father's shadow to claim it. The clan's silver blades that had marked her as outcast. Belonging was a mirage, she had long philosophized, a mortal delusion unfit for one who hungered yet could not fully embrace the night. Yet here, in Thorn's shadowed court, the illusion solidified, drawn inexorably to his ethical solitude. A king who forbade the turning of innocence, who sought atonement in justice rather than conquest. Their connection resisted naming, a slow burn rationalized as duty, but blooming inevitable as the rose's thorns. As they descended to the courtyard, the drizzle kissed their faces like spectral tears, the air alive with the snort of horses and the clink of armor. The riders, 10 strong, cloaked in midnight hues, dismounted under torchlight that painted their faces in stark gold and black. Their leader, a vampiress named Lyrian with hair like raven wings and eyes scarred by border flames, stepped forward, her boots splashing in puddles that reflected the castle's looming spires. "King Thorn," she intoned, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "The eastern clans ride not as foes, but as mirrors to your peril. The mortals mass with silver and stake, their inquisitors preaching our end as divine will. Yield the throne to a regency, or watch Dravenmore burn as Constantinople did." Thorn's posture remained unyielding, the wind tugging at his silver-streaked hair, but Alara sensed the tremor in his stance, the philosophical dilemma of power's isolation, where every alliance masked potential venom. The courtyard's stones, slick and textured underfoot, seemed to pulse with the kingdom's heartbeat, distant thunder rumbling like the approach of death itself, ever-present specter in this Gothic theater. Isolde flanked him, her locket clutched tight, while Alara lingered at the edge, senses probing the rider's sense, wolfsbane faint but persistent, mingled with the acrid bite of fear and ambition. Lyrian's gaze slid to Alara, recognition sharpening like a fang. "The Dhampir," she murmured, a note of disdain laced with curiosity. "Whispers say you unraveled Vesper's ploy, but half-bloods bring their own curses, mortal frailty in immortal wars." The taunt struck deep, reopening Alara's wounds, but she met it with defiance, stepping into the torchlight's glow. This was the ritual's cusp, a moment of choice where vulnerability could forge transformation or invite ruin. "Test us with words, not threats," Alara replied, her voice steady, carrying the drizzle's rhythm. She extended her scarred palm toward Lyrian, the jagged line gleaming wetly. "Or let truth's taste reveal your loyalties, as it did the traitors." The courtyard hushed, breaths suspended, the horses stamping unease into the puddles. Thorn's hand grazed her elbow, a touch cool and anchoring, stirring the forbidden spark between them. Love's redemption whispering against the curse of war. Lyrian hesitated, her scarred eyes flickering to Thorn, weighing the Regency's promise against exposure. With a hiss, she offered her wrist, and Alara pricked it lightly, drawing the essence in an intimate exchange that blurred boundaries of trust and trespass. The blood flooded her senses, not pure venom, but divided. Loyalty to the clans warring with coerced oaths to the hunters, a political fracture born of desperation. She released, staggering slightly, the world tilting in reds and silvers. "Divided hearts," she gasped. "Some ride for unity, others for the mortal's pyres. The conspiracy festers deeper, spies in your midst, Lyrian, turning allies to ash." Outrage rippled through the riders, accusations flying like arrows in the night, but Thorn's command silenced them, his presence a gravitational force amid the chaos. Isolde's face drained of color, her locket slipping to the stones with a clatter that echoed like breaking oaths. As factions splintered, loyalists drawing blades against suspected traitors, the courtyard erupted into skirmish, steel clashing under the moon's fractured gaze, blood mingling with rain to stain the earth crimson. Alara fought at Thorn's side, her movements a blur of hybrid grace, dodging a traitor's silver-tipped dagger that whispered of her past hunts. Pain bloomed in her shoulder from a glancing blow, hot and textured, but she pressed on, driven by the tether that now felt like destiny's chain. Thorn dispatched a foe with restrained fury, his eyes meeting hers across the fray. A silent vow amid the suffering's beauty, where choice between life and eternity sharpened like thorns. Yet as the skirmish waned, Lyrian knelt in feigned submission, only to whisper a final revelation to Thorn. The hunter's vanguard breaches the outer woods at dawn, and within these walls another waits. Isolde's locket hides a map to your downfall. The elder gasped, betrayal's mask shattering, her tears mixing with the drizzle as guards seized her. In that instant, Thorn's world fractured further, guilt's shadow deepening, while Ilara's heart clenched, their bond, forged in revelation, now threatened by the intimate treachery of those closest. As dawn's gray light pierced the mist, illuminating Isolde's trembling form and the wounded strewn like fallen petals, Ilara wondered if redemption lay in Thorn's embrace or if the war's encroaching dawn would claim them both in its merciless light. The thorny rose on his wrist seemed to bleed anew, a symbol of love's inevitable wound, as horns blared once more from the horizon. Hunters, or something far more personal, arriving to seal the night's unraveling. Dawn's pallid fingers clawed through the mist-shrouded battlements of Castle Dravenmore, painting the courtyard in hues of bruised silver and crimson, where blood mingled with the night's reluctant retreat. Ilara Voss knelt amid the aftermath, her shoulder wound a throbbing testament to the skirmish's fury. A shallow gash from the traitor's silver blade, its venom seeping like whispered doubts into her veins. The air hung thick with the coppery reek of spilled life and the sodden chill of earth, horses whinnying uneasily as guards bound the fallen riders, their cloaks sodden rags fluttering like defeated banners. Isolde's locket lay shattered on the flagstones, its innards spilling forth, a fragile parchment etched with the kingdom's hidden passages. A map to Thorn's downfall, inked in the hand of long-dead inquisitors. The elder vampire trembled in irons, her once elegant form crumpled like faded velvet, tears carving rivulets down cheeks pale as moonlit marble. Betrayal's texture was raw, intimate, a mother's grief twisted into treason, her child's portrait now stained with the ink of conspiracy. Thorn Blackwood stood over her, his silhouette a monolith against the encroaching light, the thorny rose tattoo on his wrist stark as a fresh brand in the torchlight's dying glow. Centuries of ethical isolation cracked under this blow. Isolde had been his confidant since the Purge, a relic of shared sorrows, her plagues-born losses mirroring his own poisoned love for Eliza. Now, her confession spilled like the drizzle's remnants, coerced by mortal emissaries who promised her child's resurrection through forbidden rites, a delusion that had lured her into the web of Vesper's extended plot. "I sought only to end the suffering," she wept, voice fracturing like glass underfoot, the wind carrying her words to the spires where ravens croaked judgments from shadowed eaves. Thorn's hematite eyes darkened, not with rage, but a profound sorrow, the philosophical weight of immortality's curse, where every bond invited such venomous unraveling. He had chosen eternity to protect, yet it hollowed him, leaving only the echo of choices that damned the innocent. Ilara rose, ignoring the fire in her shoulder, her hybrid blood already knitting the wound with reluctant efficiency. She approached Thorn, the courtyard's slick stones treacherous under her boots, each step a meditation on her own fractures, the moor's abandonment, the silver scar that bound her to half-existence, rationalizing her proximity as mere strategy in this escalating war, hunters at the borders, clans fracturing within. She felt the inevitable pull, a tether woven from shared shadows. Death lingered here, invisible arbiter, its scythe glinting in the dawn's haze, promising to claim thrones and hearts alike. "She was your light once," Alara murmured, her voice textured with the mist's cool caress, close enough to sense the subtle chill radiating from his skin. But light twists in the dark. Let her go, into exile, not the depths. Mercy might redeem what venom has wrought. Thorn turned to her, the wind tugging at his silver-streaked hair, framing eyes that held the depth of forgotten sieges. In that gaze, Alara glimpsed the man beneath the king. Not the monster of legends, but one marked by guilt's indelible ink, seeking atonement in a realm of endless betrayal. His hand found hers, cool fingers intertwining with her warmth. A ritual unspoken, born of the night's revelations, where vulnerability bridged their worlds. "Mercy," he echoed, the word heavy as the rose's thorns, "is the choice I denied Eliza. To spare her would invite more shadows, but to condemn echoes my own fall." The touch ignited something profound, a spark of redemption amid the curse. Love resisted as folly, rationalized as alliance, yet blooming inevitable, sensual in its quiet intensity, the brush of skin like velvet over steel, stirring desires long buried under survival's weight. Isolde's sobs crescendoed, drawing their attention as guards hauled her toward the gates. "The hunters come at first light," she gasped, a final revelation tearing from her lips like a thorn from flesh. Not just steel and fire, they bear a relic, the Inquisitor's chalice, said to unmake immortals. Vesper's plot was to weaken you for this, the clan's division, their bait. The courtyard stilled, breaths suspended in the mist, the distant rumble of approaching thunder or hooves, vibrating through the ground like a heartbeat quickening toward oblivion. Thorn's grip tightened on Alara's hand, a choice crystallizing: confront the vanguard alone, preserving his court's fragile unity, or rally what remained, risking total schism. Philosophical introspection flooded him. The beauty of human suffering lay in its finitude, a light he had lost, yet in Alara's defiant warmth, it flickered anew, tempting him to share eternity's burden. Alara pulled him aside into the shadow of the inner archway where dawn's light barely pierced, the stone walls cool and textured under her free palm. "Choose with me," she urged, her scarred hand pressing against his chest, feeling the unyielding rhythm beneath, eternal, yet alive with dilemma. This was the ritual's heart. Not blood-tasting, but soul-bearing, a moment where she offered her half-life as bridge. "I've walked the edge of your world, resisted its call. But if we face this together, your mercy, my senses, we might forge something beyond war's grasp. Redemption, not just survival." Her words hung poetic, intimate, the mist beading on her lashes like unshed tears, evoking the sensual tragedy of their bond. Light in shadows, love as both salve and wound. Thorn's free hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the curve of her jaw with deliberate tenderness. The contact electric, awakening textures long dormant, the faint pulse of her vein, the subtle scent of rain on her skin. "Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die," he whispered, voice a caress laced with dread. "I chose for power, lost my soul. With you. I might choose for light." The confession cracked his resistance, their lips brushing in a kiss tentative as dawn, soft, profound, tasting of salt and eternity, a revelation that bound them amid the unraveling realm. Yet as passion deepened, horns blared from the horizon, sharp and inexorable, shattering the moment. Scouts shouted from the walls. The hunter's vanguard crested the ridge, banners unfurled with the chalice's emblem, a golden cup wreathed in flames, flanked by armored mortals and shadowed vampires, traitors unveiled in the light. Alara broke away, heart pounding against the cage of her ribs, the kiss's warmth fading into resolve's chill. Thorn's eyes held hers, a silent plea. Stand, choose this fragile eternity. But as the first arrows whistled over the battlements, embedding in the courtyard's earth with lethal whispers, doubt coiled in her gut. The relic's promise of unmaking, Isolde's map leading foes through hidden veins. Had their tether illuminated redemption or merely invited death's intimate embrace? In the chaos of drawing steel, as Thorn commanded the defenses and Ilara's fangs bared against the tide, she wondered if love could redeem the damned, or if dawn would claim them in its merciless revelation, leaving only thorns where roses bloomed. The arrow's whistle sliced through the dawn mist like the sighs of vengeful specters, embedding in the courtyard's flagstones with a thud that reverberated through Ilara Voss's bones, each impact a punctuation to the fragile peace their kiss had forged. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Thorn Blackwood, the warmth of his lips still lingering on hers, a forbidden ember amid the encroaching chill, while the air thickened with the acrid bite of fletched iron and the distant clamor of the hunter's vanguard cresting the ridge. Torchlight from the battlements painted erratic shadows across the sodden earth, illuminating the sprawl of wounded riders and the shattered remnants of Isolde's locket, its map now clutched in a guard's gauntlet as proof of deeper treachery. Ilara's shoulder wound throbbed, Silver's venom weaving doubts like thorns through her veins, but her hybrid blood surged defiant, sharpening her senses to the textures of war. The slick grip of her dagger's hilt, the metallic tang of fear sweat from the defenders rallying behind Thorn, the relentless patter of mist on armor like tears from an indifferent sky. Thorn's command cut through the chaos, his voice a resonant thunder laced with the ethics that had defined his solitary reign. Hold the gates. No quarter for traitors, but spare the coerced. Mercy tempers the blade. He moved with immortal precision, dispatching a shadowed vampire who lunged from the fray, fangs bared in desperate betrayal, his strike clean and restrained, avoiding the kill that would only feed the cycle of guilt he bore. Ilara glimpsed the thorny rose tattoo on his wrist as he parried, the ink's faded lines seeming to pulse with Eliza's unresolved echo, a symbol of love's redemptive wound, now binding him to this new tether, inevitable despite the resistance that had once armored his heart. She had rationalized their connection as alliance's necessity, a Dhampir's utility in his crumbling court, but the kiss had shattered that facade. It was transformation's spark, love as both curse and salvation, drawing her fractured soul toward eternity's shadowed embrace. The hunters breached the outer walls in a wave of steel and fanatic zeal, their banners snapping like whips in the wind, the Inquisitor's chalice borne aloft on a velvet-draped pole, golden, wreathed in etched flames that caught the dawn's pallid glow, promising unmaking for all who defied mortality's fragile law. Mortal inquisitors in hooded robes chanted litanies, their voices a droning counterpoint to the clash of swords, while embedded vampire dissidents slithered through the mist, eyes gleaming with the ambition Vesper's plot had ignited. Ilara fought at Thorn's flank, her movements a blur of half-human grace and vampiric ferocity, dodging a blessed bolt that singed her cloak with holy fire's bite. Pain bloomed hot and textured across her arm, evoking the Moor's abandonment, the silver scar on her palm that had marked her as eternal outsider. Yet in the suffering's beauty, sweat stinging her eyes, blood's copper warmth trickling down her skin, she found clarity. Death hovered here, not as thief, but as silent witness to choice, urging her to claim the light Thorn offered amid the shadows. A hulking inquisitor charged them, chalice in hand, its surface etched with runes that hummed like distant heartbeats, drawing on ancient rites to dissolve immortal essence. Thorn intercepted, his blade meeting the relic's guard in a shower of sparks that illuminated his face, regret's lines deepening, guilt's weight surfacing as he recalled Constantinople's fall, where his turning had poisoned Eliza's life. "Yield the cup," he growled, voice steady but laced with philosophical sorrow, "or taste the venom of your own zeal." The Inquisitor sneered, swinging the chalice like a mace, its aura flaring to sap Thorn's strength, veins blackening momentarily under his skin. Elara lunged, her dagger slicing the man's wrist, not to kill, but to spill the relic's consecrated wine, which sizzled on the stones like acid rain, releasing a vapor that choked the air with incense and decay. In the ritual's frenzy, Elara pressed close to Thorn, their bodies a synchronized dance amid the melee, his cool precision complementing her warm ferocity, breaths mingling in ragged harmony. "The chalice weakens you," she whispered, senses probing its aura, the scarred palm extended to touch its rim. Vulnerability coursed through her, a choice crystallized, absorb its unmaking power through her hybrid blood, diluting it with her mortal frailty, or let it claim him, preserving her solitude. Resistance flickered, eternity's curse repelled her, rationalized as unfit for one born broken. But inevitability won. Love's pull a gravitational ache. She gripped the cup, agony exploding like shattered glass in her veins, the runes burning into her flesh, but her Dhampir resilience warped the magic, turning holy fire to flickering embers. Thorn shielded her, felling the Inquisitor with a strike that echoed mercy's edge, his hand finding hers in the haze, a touch that grounded the pain, transforming suffering into shared redemption. The vanguard faltered as the chalice's power ebbed, spilling its contents into the mist where it evaporated like forgotten oaths. Defenders surged, driving back the tide, traitors exposed and bound under Thorn's unyielding justice. No executions, but exiles to the wilds, a philosophical mercy that spared the damned from deeper shadows. Isolde, spared the depths at Elara's urging, was led away at dawn's full light, her form vanishing into the fog-shrouded veils, Locket's map burned in the hearth as a vow of renewed vigilance. The courtyard fell quiet, save for the wounded's moans and the raven's croaks, dawn's light gilding the bloodied stones in hues of gold and rose, illuminating the kingdom's fragile rebirth. Thorn turned to Elara, the battle's dust settling on his cloak like ash from pyres past, his hematite eyes holding hers with profound intensity. The thorny rose on his wrist brushed her skin as he drew her close, the contact sensual in its quiet aftermath, velvet chill against fevered warmth, a texture of intimacy woven from war's forge. "You chose me," he murmured, voice textured with wonder and dread, "when eternity offered only isolation. In your light, I see redemption's bloom, not the curse I feared." Elara's heart stuttered, the silver scar on her palm now a bridge rather than barrier, her trauma's weight lightening under his gaze. She had resisted this bond, philosophized it as folly amid the beauty of human suffering's finitude. But here, in the dawn's embrace, it bloomed inevitable. Love as transformation, redeeming the broken and the guilty, a choice between death's whisper and life's eternal echo. Yet as the sun crested fully, casting long shadows across Dravenmoor's spires, a distant horn sounded, not of war, but of envoys from unified clans, bearing tidings of fragile peace. Thorn's kingdom endured, but the web of betrayal lingered in memory's undercurrents, a reminder that every alliance harbored thorns. Elara leaned into him, the mist beating on her lashes like dew on petals, wondering if their tether would weather eternity's storms or wilt under its unrelenting gaze. In that suspended dawn, with death's presence fading like night, she chose to stay, not as advisor, but as partner in the light they had kindled, a redemption that bound mortal fragility to immortal resolve, forever entwined. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts.